Welcome to the first edition of Live Free TV, and joining me is Representative Dan Itse from Fremont, New Hampshire. Thanks for coming up, Dan.
I'm very honored to be here. Talking to the people is what I love to do.
Great. And you have another reason to be here, is your book that just came out, what, a month ago?
It's been kind of progressively coming out over the last month. It first came out on Kindle, and then we found there were some problems with the cover, and we brought it now out in paperback. But the book is really about, well, when people say, what's a book about? The question is, that I come back with is, who's in charge of America?
Right. And
so who's in charge of America? I'm asking you.
Well, it's supposed to be the people.
How do you know that?
Because there's a lot of us, and there's not as much of them.
That's what the book is about. The book is about...
And the book is called States Have Powers.
Have powers, the power of the people.
Right.
Use them or lose them. And that's really important, because if we don't actually exercise the power that we have as the people through our state governments, the federal government is never going to respect us. So
Right.
that's the whole point, is that the reason that we have states is to enhance the ability of the people to exercise their inherent power. The state doesn't have any power that doesn't first rest with us. We delegate that power, the use of that power, to the state for the purpose of greater effectiveness, whether it's defense or the policing powers. I mean, common law power is the power to citizens' arrest. We also delegate that specifically to police departments to do that job of maintaining the public peace on our behalf.
That's called posse comitatus? Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about just the inherent power of... We have, as individuals, we have the power to keep people from infringing upon our rights and our property.
Mm-hmm.
We delegate that power to the state, to the localities, as policing power to make it more effective, so that there's somebody doing that full time.
Right. Now, Dan, you've been on our show before, here in the studio, and you're a bit of a constitutional historian. Did we used to have, as a country, did we used to delegate more power to the states rather than the federal government? How did we get away from that?
The federal government, well, first of all, just lack of memory.
Yeah.
Public education. If everybody teaches the kids that the power comes from the federal government, then they believe it. But structurally, contractually, within our constitutions, that's not the way we're set up.
How do we get back to that, then?
By becoming familiar with our constitutions. One of if you look at our Constitution of the state of New Hampshire, is divided into two parts. The first is the Bill of Rights, and the second is the form of government, which describes, okay, you've set forth in the Bill of Rights that you have a republic, that you have three branches of government. Generally, you refer to the legislature, you refer to the judiciary. When you get to the form of government, it actually describes how this is executed. The original capstone to the Bill of Rights, Article 38, now there's now an Article 39, which has to do with converting towns into cities. But if you look at the original capstone to the Bill of Rights, what it really says is the job of the people is to read, study, and discuss the Constitution, to use that as the measure, or understanding those principles as a measure of who would they put in public office, and to enforce those principles upon government. It isn't the judiciary that's supposed to be enforcing the Constitution. It's you and me as individuals in the community.
Speaking of the judiciary, last year we had the question 2, which would amend Article 73A to limit the power of courts through the legislature. That failed narrowly. Why do you think that failed? That would have brought some power back to the state. I think to the people.
It would have brought power back to the people.
Rather than the elite court.
Right. And you have to understand, Article 73A the amendment to it didn't radically change the distribution of power. It recognized the legislature's power to make court rules, which the judiciary says they recognize unless the legislature does something they don't like, and then they say, no, that's our job. Traditionally speaking, all the power to make court rules rested with the legislature until Article 73A in 1984, I believe, or the 1980s.
Oh, okay.
But until that time, the job of making court rules was the job of the legislature, unless the legislature specifically delegated that power in particular instances to the court. So if you go back to 1790s, first court rules were or the first statutes regarding court rules was the legislature allowed the court to make rules for dealing with fees and administrative kind of stuff, failure to appear, things like that.
Do they have appointed judges, or were they elected?
They were always appointed. They were,
okay.
They were always appointed by governor and council. But the interesting thing is in the conclusion of that law, it says the court has the power to make laws in these rules in these specific areas as long as they aren't contrary to the statutes or the Constitution.
Wow.
So it was the legislature making that admonishment to the courts to stay within the Constitution, contrary to what we often see now coming out of the courts. It's a huge shift in paradigm. It was the legislature who was, as the representatives of the people, who have the final say on what's constitutional, making that admonishment. So the courts, what they really did was they forced the legislature to make a decision.
Oh, okay.
The legislature tried to impeach the judges for finding the law unconstitutional, and failing to impeach, they then repealed the law. But per Article...
So is that in your book?
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of it. Per Article 29...
I just kind of wanted to get a summary of what is...
But per Article 29, the judges never presumed the power to repeal a law.
Okay.
So activist judges have since assumed the power to repeal laws, which is in fact, according to those who wrote the Constitution, unconstitutional. If you read States Have Powers, what it does is it gives you it pulls from the Constitution, it pulls from the Federalist Papers, it pulls from other contemporaneous writings prior to and about the time of the Constitutions that explain the thinking of the time and why they were giving so much power to the government. If you look at all European governments up to that point, and every other government in the world, all the power came from top down. Only in the United States, and New Hampshire in particular is, I really believe the best articulation of it, was power bottom up. It was originating that all power came from God, and from God to the people, and from the people to government. And therefore it's the job, the duty of the people to make sure that power is used in a manner that is acceptable to them.
Correct, but things got out of hand slowly over time.
Slowly, well, we were very
got away from us,
and we were very successful.
Right.
Under that paradigm, the United States became very affluent. Even as that power started to erode post-Civil War, that paradigm started to erode post-Civil War, we continued to flourish and become the most affluent society in the world. Probably the pinnacle of our power is the period from post-World War II through the 1960s. And even as the individual sovereignty of the people was eroding, we continued to be very affluent and very comfortable. And so we were comfortable with not governing our power. We became consumed.
Well, I mean,
Complacent
that's
because we're
so
doing so many other things.
what we want to do is get into a little bit of also the gold bill that was up around 2009.
Oh,
And
it's
the
been
reason,
in the
that's
legislature?
another way to bring power back to the people at a basic level, because some of that affluence was inflation.
Some of that, which is a
due
false
to
affluence.
The fiat, making our currency become a fiat currency during that period.
Yeah,
post-war
but
period.
I mean, until 1935, we actually had, I think it was 1935, under Roosevelt, we actually had gold in circulation. We used gold and silver as money. As we get to Roosevelt, he took possession of all the major resources of gold, but all of your currency still you had, and I have some at home, gold and silver.
Gold.
Well, you had gold and silver certificates. I have a $5,
Which are worthless.
I think, gold certificate that allegedly you could take down to the Treasury and turn in for that value of gold.
Yeah, this is really important because
Well,
you know
it limited how much money you had in circulation to how much money, how much gold the government had on
in its
hand.
possession. Physically, it anchored. Gold was anchoring the dollar, and it was a claim check. You can go and theoretically bring it and turn in your dollars, Federal Reserve notes for gold.
No, they were not Federal Reserve notes.
Oh, right. Okay. So
They were
became
U.S.
Federal.
Treasury notes.
Oh,
They were U.S.
okay.
Treasury notes until 1972.
Oh, okay.
Even though you had the Federal Reserve managing this money supply, that money supply was restricted by how much precious metal the government had on hand.
Until we left the gold standard.
And then later the silver standard under Nixon.
Right, in 1972, I think.
Yeah.
So then we became what they call a fiat currency completely, which is no intrinsic value to the dollar. Or just, I meant to bring in a dollar bill, but everybody knows what it looks like.
If you look at it, I mean, a federal, our money now, I mean, I keep in my wallet.
Ahead.
I
Yeah.
keep in my wallet.
I don't carry too much, but
Well, you know, if you look at this dollar bill,
yep,
it says it's a Federal Reserve note.
right.
What it actually says is that the federal government owes the government of the United States owes the Federal Reserve $1.
Right. And it's not
So
backed by
we're
anything.
trading IOUs.
Right, and people think, well, what's wrong about that? We've been doing that for years and years and decades. What's wrong with that? It's worked so far, right?
Because the more money that the federal government borrows from the Federal Reserve, creating Federal Reserve notes, the less the ones you have in your hand are worth. And one of the things I learned, the first
And
gold
we have
bill...
some charts on the valuation of the dollar over time, plummeting
Right?
to zero.
Or
Has there ever been a fiat currency that has not gone to zero that we know of?
not that I know of. Whether it's
I couldn't
Argentina,
find any.
Germany,
I did a little bit of research.
Zimbabwe,
There's hundreds of them that have
and
gone
eventually
zero.
they all become worthless.
And ours is, and the system in Britain has stayed for longer because we've been using the world system. as sort
Well,
of
and
a laundering
because
agent.
ours has remained stable because it is actually the reserve currency of the world, or has been until very recently.
Right.
Russia is now backing out of using the dollar as a reserve currency.
Not only Russia, China,
China,
Africa.
And once they drop the dollar as a reserve currency, our currency will be as valuable as the ruble.
And also, people say, well, what's the big deal about gold? It's kind of an old relic, sort of something your grandfather might have collected. But so if that is true, then why is China and Russia and Africa, why are they stockpiling gold if it has no real intrinsic value? They say, well, you can't eat gold. But yet everybody's
gold
stockpiling it around the country, world.
A real value. What I'm looking for is my actual. I have a silver.
You have some gold in there.
No, that's a challenge coin. This is a silver round. That's an ounce of silver.
Okay, I'll take that.
So that's worth $24. I do have a silver $half in here somewhere. See, there's a silver $half.
Just to show people what the real deal is.
Yeah, I have a silver dollar at home from 1896. This is a Liberty $half. It's from, if I can see it without my glasses, 1948.
Well, if New Hampshire went back to the gold standard, or allowed for currency to be legal tender, as in
simply recognized it.
Arizona and Utah have recognized it.
And it's what the Constitution says is the state cannot make anything other than gold and silver legal tender, which means they can accept gold and silver as legal tender.
And doesn't it also say that you shouldn't pay debts in anything but gold and silver, which we don't do?
Right. Well, we trade Federal Reserve notes, and if you have a gold or silver certificate, it says on it, Treasury note.
Yes.
I mean, it's a very different. It's a very different concept. One is money printed by the government of the United States. The other is money printed by the government of the United States, or notes printed by the government of the United States on behalf of the Federal Reserve.
Right. And, you know, the whole thing about this is people don't even have any connection to the gold standard or trading in gold anymore. Economists aren't even taught that in college anymore.
Well, one of the things, the first gold bill I was involved in, I think, was from the 2003-2004 term.
Oh, okay.
Sponsored by then Representative, it's a Scottish name, I can't think of it right now. And I was just a hanger-on, really. It was in my early days. And it went before the Commerce Committee. And one of the interesting things is during that time I started to get information on gold and silver. And if you look at, for instance, the value of gasoline in grams of gold, it's virtually constant over the last 50 years. I mean, it bounces a little bit about an average, but it's a gallon of gasoline is worth, I think it's about 50 grams of gold, and it still is. If you look at prior to the gasoline crisis of the early 1970s, and we went off the silver standard, gasoline was worth 13 cents a gallon. Today it's worth $3.60. If you do it, that's a ratio of 27. At that time, gold was by definition $50 an ounce. If you multiply $50 by 27, it's about 1,300. It's 1,300 and change, which is very nearly the precise value of gold right now.
And if you look at that chart, I think it's indicative of the commodities in general follow gold prices.
It doesn't matter whether it's bread,
more or less,
gold, milk. You will see that those commodities in gold are virtually constant. Mm-hmm. So I was in the hearing on this bill, and one of the chairman challenged me and said, "Well, why would we want to use gold as a standard, because its value is going up and down all the time?" And
that's another point that people make.
And I looked at him and I said, is it the value of the gold that's going up and down, or the value of the money that we're buying it with?
Exactly.
And the vice chairman said, he's right. And that was the end of the discussion. But the point is that the value of gold doesn't go up and down dramatically.
If you look at it over centuries, it's more or less constant.
Yeah. You could always, in terms of paper money, you could always weave a fraction of gold or silver into the fabric.
That's a thought.
Which would give it an intrinsic value. Then the only way to counterfeit it is to put that gold into the fabric, in which case it's not truly counterfeit. It actually has that value. You might shave on it a little bit right now, like the federal government has done on the money it's returning to Germany. The gold it's returning to Germany that used to be 99% pure when Germany deposited it, and now it's, I think, 96% pure. So Germany figured it out and they complained, but you know, it was.
We'll work on that.
It's like it's just like in the olden days when we actually used gold and silver, people would actually shave the edges of the coins.
Oh yeah, or clip the corners or something.
Right, and so it wasn't. They weren't really giving an ounce of gold or silver.
Right. Yeah. The other thing that people might go is maybe an electronic system of real golds, and you
but how real
trade
is
in
that?
nanograms sort of thing, because not everybody's going to want to carry on coins all the time.
But then you're believing that that gold is really there, and you've never seen it.
Well, that's how it is now. Yes, I know.
Not if you actually buy the gold. Not if you buy the physical gold.
Well, no, yeah, I was talking about Fort Knox.
I mean, I myself would not buy virtual gold.
No, it would have to be physical gold.
I would want to have it in my hand and put it in a box in my house, or in a safety deposit box, but then you have to presume that you can actually get into the safety deposit box, or nobody else does it sometime in the future.
Yeah, I think, isn't Texas starting a bank for gold? They're kind of getting into it.
Montana has a state bank based on gold.
Do you think that we're going to see another gold bill come by? Do you think people are going to give up on that? Or?
No, and we shouldn't, because the only way you produce the change is to keep introducing the idea. A lot of my ideas that were unthought of when I entered the legislature, or thought ill of when I entered the legislature, have become relatively mainstream. Good example is redress of grievances.
Great, tell us about that a little bit.
Redress of grievances, it is your constitutional right. If you look at the Constitution of the state of New Hampshire, and you look at the real construct, Articles 16 and 17, I think, if I'm right, I have my Constitution in my pocket, clearly, by describing jurisdiction of criminal cases, clearly put cases of the state against individuals into the realm of the judiciary.
Okay.
Article 20, by referring to jury trials, clearly puts cases of individuals against individuals into the judiciary. Articles 31 and 32, the first duty of the legislature being to hear grievances, the second being that the people have a right to have their grievances and the wrongs done them heard by petition or remonstrance, verbally, before the legislature, put cases of the people against the state into the legislature.
Okay, great.
So,
into the legislature.
when you are actually injured by the state or any of its political subdivisions, the proper venue of adjudication is the legislature, constitutionally.
I would think so.
The judiciary didn't think so.
We have the largest legislature.
We have the largest legislature of any state. We have the best representation in the world, bar none.
We've got tons of them, yeah.
Well, but when you look at the, even though the legislatures of Great Britain, I guess India, which is actually English-speaking, and the United States have larger legislatures than we do. But when you look at the number of constituents per legislator, we are the best represented people in the world. One of the reasons we've been able to maintain the degree of liberty that we have is because our level of representation is actually still consistent with the founding period.
Here in New Hampshire.
Here in New Hampshire.
That's
If
great.
you looked across the states at the time of founding, you typically had a few thousand constituents per legislator. New Hampshire had 150 voting constituents per legislator. But we still have a few thousand legislators, of the constituents per legislator. So you still have that leverage and the capacity to know your legislator. You may not exercise it, but you have the capacity to know your legislator and know what they're doing.
We feel like we know them pretty well here, I think, in these parts. All right, so we're talking about Article 38, which you say is the most important thing to remember at this time as far as our states' rights. Which says?
Okay, which says it. Constantly reading, discussing, thinking about those virtues, those principles.
Okay.
Your Constitution is indispensably necessary to the preservation of liberty.
Right, so in other words, educate yourself.
The people, therefore, ought to have a particular regard to those principles in the selection of their officers and representatives. That's what you're going to do this coming fall. Over the summer, this coming fall, is you're going to select whom you're putting into the State House.
Okay, so you're saying...
And you should use those principles...
Read Article 38 and educate yourself.
Well, read the whole Constitution. I have a commentary on the Constitution.
That would lead you to the...
okay.
Yes.
Because how do you know the principles that you're supposed to be discussing unless you read the Constitution?
You have to do that.
So you're supposed to use those. It's a voter's guide. You have a voter's guide in the Constitution. Those are the principles you're supposed to use in selecting your officers and representatives.
Okay.
And they, parenthetically the people, have a right to require of their lawgivers an exact and constant observance of those principles in the formation, it says, but those principles in the formation and execution of the laws necessary for the good administration of government. So you, the people, we the people, have a right to require of those we put in office and those whom they appoint an exact and constant observance of the principles of the Constitution and justice, moderation, temperance, industry, frugality, all the social virtues in the good administration of government, which says something very important. Okay, I go to the State House. I'm not the government. The governor, the executive council, the countless bureaucrats, they aren't the government. They're the administrators of government. Andrew Tyler, who is a historian.
Like yourself.
In 1776.
Oh, okay.
Okay, in 1776, he's a historian, and he writes a book about government.
Okay.
And one of his observations is that the world's greatest civilizations have all gone through a cycle, from tyranny to faith, faith to liberty, liberty to abundance, abundance to complacency, complacency, and there's a couple D words in there.
This sounds like the 7 stages of empires as well.
Eventually to apathy, and from apathy back to tyranny.
Ah, so you think we're
okay?
At the
So the question is, can we short circuit? Do we really have to go back to tyranny, or can is our American DNA strong enough that all we need is the threat of tyranny?
I don't think we're going back to tyranny. Do you? You think so?
Well, we're being the federal government is now prescribing what we have to buy. Can you predict, if you go to court, can you predict with any reliability what the outcome will be?
No.
Okay, what is the definition of tyranny?
Don't have it on hand.
Arbitrary power and oppression.
Oh, by any group, no matter how large?
Right. Arbitrary. It's the arbitrariness that makes it tyranny.
Ah.
So, are we flirting with it?
Yes. I would say so.
Are we there yet? Not really, probably. But we're definitely flirting with it.
All I know is, yes, when you take the power away from your local level, which is more predictable because you know them, you know your state, and you trust them much more.
The more power you
power
you allow to go far away from you,
the worse it is.
The worse it is.
There's no
and the whole point of states have powers is to pull that power back to where it is supposed to be constitutionally.
Right. So is there anything on the upcoming elections that we need to know about and pay particular attention to?
Who you send to the legislature?
Representative Dan Itse, constitutional storyteller and historian from Fremont. Thank you very much.